Hi, friends. Thank you for listening in today again. This is the audio version of Chapter 3 of Pieces of Purple, and in it, we'll explore the passport culture. As usual, in a couple of weeks, I'll release a videoed conversation with an adult MK in which we'll further discuss the topics covered in this chapter. Of course, the audio of that chat will appear here as a podcast episode too, but I think you'll agree there's so much more life and nuance that comes across in a video format. To view this video and any previous podcast videos, follow the link to Pieces of Purple's YouTube channel in this episode's notes, and make sure you subscribe while you're there so you don't miss any of the upcoming fare. You'll also find links to my website there, my contact information, and the book's Amazon page. Remember that the printed version of the book contains poetry, discussion questions, and quotes from 50-some adult MKs that you will not hear in these recordings. So it might be worth going over to Amazon and picking up your own copy. And now, here's Pieces of Purple, Chapter 3, The Passport Culture. Our passport culture is the culture our parents grew up in, the country they called home before moving overseas. Here's what our loved ones in our passport culture need to understand. Our geographical allegiance as global nomads is fervent but broad. Even when we've settled for some time in our passport country, we might still watch the news with nostalgia, scanning footage of places we've called home for familiar faces, or feeling the environmental crises playing out in our overseas countries in a visceral way. The intensity of our love for those foreign lands is often heightened by elapsed time and distance. Though many of us do develop an authentic attachment to our passport culture, we can't fathom making it the center of our identity. Our international years predicate our worldview, no matter how constricted our geography might become later in life. Our cultural palette is so panoramic that mono-national belonging feels like betrayal. It's not that we don't love our passport culture. We can be diverse in our allegiances and still include it in the mix. It's that we love our foreign homes too, and the depth of our missing them can make us feel more heart-connected to them than to our current location. So we might hesitate, at least for a while, to put down deep roots, and we might avoid taking social or political positions associated with purely national concerns when we're in the country our parents call home. This can make transitioning there challenging. Now, transitions are not always devastating. In fact, MKs who enjoy adventure and discovery can be galvanized at the thought of another move. They get fed, not depleted, by the prospect of new people and places. Yet when I ask adult TCKs what the hardest transition of their life has been, the most common response I get, by far, is returning to their passport culture. Particularly for those of us who lived in our adoptive culture or cultures from birth or a very young age, our attachment to those places and to their people is naturally more intense than what we feel for our passport country, where sometimes we only visited for a limited time and every couple of years. Yet, for many global nomads, returning to that not quite home more long-term is inevitable. Whether for higher education, or nearness to family, or beginning a career, most TCKs do, at some point and at least for a time, repatriate to their passport culture. And a majority of them struggle, sometimes just initially, and sometimes for decades. There are several reasons for the difficulties they face, but I found that the dominant one is attitude. A global nomad's pre, peri, and post-transition attitude can make a decisive impact when that leap happens, and it is hugely influenced by these 6 factors, all of which can be addressed and managed well in advance. Number 1, international opinion and media coverage of the culture. Jude had an American passport. He kept it hidden in a safe buried in the backyard, along with his mom's, dad's, and siblings. Being an American was not something to brag about where he grew up. The United States military had set up several operation posts within 100 miles from his home, and there were rumors of cross-border incursions under cover of darkness. The population of this place he loved lived in fear of further escalation. Jude read the headlines of national news websites condemning American involvement in regional unrest, and he heard the anti-American discourse of neighbors as they chatted in the street around sunset, loudly and intensely, as was the norm in that culture. There were times when he felt embarrassed by his association with the Stars and Stripes Nation, yet he knew he was a representation of it to his neighbors in an unintentional and often unwanted way. Even as a child, he felt the weight of his passport country's reputation. Yes, he streamed American TV shows and movies and stayed up through the night with special treats to watch the Super Bowl. And yes, he loved nothing more than a good burger and fries. But he also experienced the United States through local eyes. A superpower whose world policing, he felt, had caused real harm to a country he called home. Jude is not alone. There are other MKs who grew up in places where embracing their passport country felt tenuous. We've so often been asked questions we can't answer, and then there's the stereotyping, the accusations, the mocking. It all gets to be too much for some of us. So we might sever whatever ties we feel, sometimes even subconsciously, to ease the tension between loving and loathing. This can seriously complicate our reentry when the time comes for us to return, quote-unquote, home. Number 2, bad experiences in the passport culture. Returning for a couple months every few years really isn't enough time for global nomads to bond with places and people, nor is it sufficient for them to develop a broader, informed view of the country and its inhabitants. If their connection with places and people in the passport culture hasn't been nurtured during their time away, it'll feel foreign and possibly intimidating. And they won't look forward to returns if there's nothing and no one there that they feel drawn to. Because of this personal disconnect, it's easy for just one significant negative experience to color a TCK's entire perception of the culture. One terrible evening with a youth group in which they knew no one, one frightening weather event, one encounter with an abusive stranger, one 4-week road trip that left every member of the family exhausted and on edge, needs unmet and rest unfound. Aaron wrote this: 8th grade in Minnesota. The kids in my class had never left the country. I was bullied on the school bus. My Christian friends were catty and backstabbing. My family was under huge stress about whether or not we should move back to our place of service, and I hated almost everything about that year. I hated America after that year. I've talked with dozens, maybe hundreds of Aarons in my 30-some years in MK ministry, and she is not alone. One scary or harmful experience might be a TCK's only takeaway from a visit home if it's intense enough to override whatever pleasant experiences happened there too. Number 3, anger about having to return to the passport culture. If you're forced to go to the grocery store when you'd rather stay home, you might hate the grocery store. If you're forced to go out and shovel the snow when there's a fire in the fireplace and your favorite TV show is on, you might hate the driveway. And if you're forced to move to your passport country for a sabbatical year or college or whatever other reason when you'd much prefer staying in the place that actually feels like home, you might hate that country too. Some TCKs just do not want to be there. It's that simple. Number 4, fear of permanence. TCKs have lived a technicolor life. We've navigated our way through places and people groups that are vibrant and multifaceted. We've been thrilled and terrified, shocked and mesmerized and enchanted. Whatever it is, we've seen it, tasted it, climbed it, explored it, and survived it. The thought of leaving our technicolor world to enter what we perceive to be a terminally beige culture is daunting. And the possibility of even inadvertently putting down roots there And not being able to be a world roamer again is terrifying, at least initially. So we tiptoe home, braced for danger, so sure that if we get sucked into this mostly monocultural environment, we'll be shackled to it for the rest of our existence. We measure the risk of getting anchored there against our will, and we balk at any force or any person that seems capable of overwhelming our resistance to the blight of geographical stuckness. Number 5, arrogance about the culture's limitations. Generalizations about our passport culture can run rampant in MK circles, and there is nothing pretty or helpful about them. All fill in the blank are narrow-minded. They're all shallow and materialistic and so dumb about the world outside their borders. We might hate statements that all TCKs are socially odd, but hesitate not 1 second to indict all inhabitants of our passport culture with our accusations. We shake our heads at their shortcomings and pat ourselves on the back for all we know. The truth is that we are not better than our monocultural counterparts because we've seen more of the planet, and they are not inferior because they haven't. But that's a hard concession to make when our fear of reentry demands that we buttress our self-esteem by hyping up our knowledge and considering others less astute than we are. But they have books and the internet. They could learn about what's happening in the rest of the world, we bluster. But when I ask incensed TCKs what factions are fighting in the war in Sierra Leone, or what the main industry in the capital of New Zealand is, or when the government of Latvia fell, they have no clue, unless they're one of the few who have lived there, of course. Well, shame on them, right? Wrong. One of the reasons MKs know so much about foreign places is that those places have touched our lives. If they hadn't in some way played a role in our experience or in the experience of people we love, we wouldn't know much about them either. Yes, we may have greater curiosity about geography and culture and history than our peers do, but that's also because we've been blessed to live in contexts where exploring all of those was necessary, fun, and useful. It's our multiculturality that feeds our desire to know more about other places, yet our monocultural passport country counterparts have generally lived different lives than ours, more hemmed, less far-flung lives. They haven't been exposed to fascinating differences in foreign places or had to learn about countries outside their own borders in order to assimilate there. Having never experienced other cultures or known someone who did, they didn't develop the appetite and intrigue so many global nomads do. I often tell MKs that looking down on people for not knowing what river runs through Paris is no different than blaming a blind person for not knowing what the color red is. We know red because we've been fortunate enough to see and grow up in red, to explore and savor and embed in it. It's not my monocultural friend's fault that she doesn't know what river runs through Paris. It's the Seine, by the way. What was normal to me is unimaginable to her, and that's something for me to cherish, not lord over others. Number 6, self-protection from heightened expectations. There are intimidating expectations around a TCK's return to his or her passport culture. So many friends and relatives insist on calling it home, whether the TCK has lived there for any significant amount of time or not. And we know that our reentry should, therefore, in their eyes, be smooth, devoid of any lostness or embarrassing mistakes. Home, after all, is familiar, right? We're supposed to just dovetail our way into established norms and skill sets as if we've lived there all our lives. We global nomads pride ourselves in our adaptability. Drop us into a tribal village in Bolivia and we'll figure out how to weave our way into that lifestyle. But drop us into inner city Seoul or small town Manitoba, if those are our passport homes, with the unspoken expectation that it'll be a piece of cake, and we'll be rattled and unsure. Because in Bolivia, we all know there will be challenges. But in our parents' nation of Korea or Canada, the expectations feel like a trap. So some of us will decide before we even begin our reentry that we don't like this place and we don't want to engage with it. We'll declare that we're not even going to try to fit in, because if we don't attempt it, we won't fail at it. It lowers the risk of both rejection and humiliation. And our very TCK fixation on not failing in cultural contexts gets appeased by that approach. It took me years to figure out what my relationship to my parents' cultures was, in my case Canadian through my dad and American through my mom. On the one hand, I had a Disneyland perception of them. The cars were big, the laughter was loud, the entertainment was stellar, the root beer floats were delightful, and those Saturday morning cartoons were sensational. On the other hand, much as I relished the oversized everything I experienced in those countries, I also judged it as superficial and decadent. I felt a degree of cynicism about their populations, and I brought a judgmental kind of disapproval to people whose perspectives felt myopic and landlocked. An MK's relationship to his or her passport culture is easily swayed by so many factors. Establishing and maintaining a bonded connection to it early in life would set us up for more positive outcomes, whether we end up repatriating there or not. Parents who know how to balance the Disneyland experiences with a thoughtful, truthful understanding of the country's assets and limitations can play a key role in this as well. Global nomads also have some responsibility to adjust our own attitude, particularly as we grow older. If we can switch our perspective from thinking we're special or superior to being thankful, we can also shift our attitude from arrogance to gratitude. And if we can disarm our resistance and choose instead to apply our adaptive transitional skills to this culture, just as we would to any other, we'll set ourselves up for a much healthier and less angst-ridden repatriation. Considering our deep longing for true relationship, putting some intentionality into the mindset with which we re-enter our passport culture might prevent us from sabotaging our chance of establishing meaningful connections in this place that may not yet feel like home, but may still become one of them. Thank you for listening in again today, friends. Make sure you check the show notes for all those links I mentioned earlier, and please share these resources with any churches or friends or relatives who might benefit from them. And remember that you can go back and catch earlier chapters of the book right here on this podcast platform or on YouTube. I hope you'll check back in a couple of weeks for a meaningful conversation about the passport culture, where we might even cover how to prepare young children to return to it. As I release this episode into the world today, I want you to know that I celebrate the purple you are, or the purple you love. Thank you for listening.